Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we have something a little bit different. We're going to look at the top 10 rock debut albums of all time. I love a debut album. It crystallizes the essence of a band or an act in its most sort of innocent and an original form. It's the very first vision of what those musicians got together and set out to do. Some bands, they knock it right out of the park straight away, and that's really exciting because overnight you can hear with that record that fashions change, styles change, trends change, and music changes. And that's certainly the case with some of the albums on this list. Others take a little bit more time to sort of catch on with the public. But I always tend to think that the cream will eventually rise to the top, and the great records do leave a legacy, whether they were instantly recognised or not. I think a sort of subtitle for this list could be maybe the 10 most influential debut albums of all time, crystallizing in essence what I was just saying a second ago. There are so many great debut albums. I'm inevitably going to leave some of your favourites off, but hopefully I'm going to justify my choices and you're going to agree with some of them. So let's get into it. At number 10, from 1969, we're going progtastic with In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. Prog rock was not really a thing until this record came out, and under the guidance of the very brilliant Robert Fripp, who is very famous for working with David Bowie and Blondie amongst others, and he was fusing along with Greg Lake, later who eventually joined Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There's blues, rock, jazz, classical, even a bit of folk. I mean, there's no denying this album's influence. You've got 21st Century Schizoid Man, the title track, In the Court of the Crimson King, and it's a busy album. It's a technical album. There's a lot going on. There's very little space, but there is real beauty in it as well. If you listen to something like Epitaph, which is absolutely stunning. No end of prog rockers laud this album as one of their biggest influences, and I think it's as the key pivotal moment in the genesis of prog rock. This album stands alone. At number 9, from 1977, completely different record, Marquee Moon by Television. This was a landmark album in alternative and indie rock. It was hugely influential on a lot of bands who followed in the 80s. You know, bands like R.E.M., U2, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Joy Division. The music is jagged. It works on the interplay between Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine's guitars, and you have these fantastic sort of little 3-minute songs like See No Evil. And then you've got these big sort of epic workouts like the title track, Marquee Moon. As a result, the album can be really, really dramatic. But at the same time, it can be kind of really nonchalant in that very cool sort of New York way. And that's a really, really neat trick. It's had a huge influence on bands, particularly bands who have 2 guitars and the way they interplay together very, very intelligently. It's not just a case of two guitars sort of harmonizing with each other. If you listen to the way they're filling the space and the lines are intertwining between them. But let's move to number 8, and from 1980, the Pretenders' debut album. This album is on merit as much as influence. Now, this was a hit straight out of the box. It had the "Stop Your Sobbing," the Ray Davies cover on it. Had A Kid, which was a beautiful song. Private Life, which was eventually covered by Grace Jones on it. I mean, this is full of really good songs. I don't think there's a bad song on here. It's produced by Chris Thomas, and his production is crisp and it's jangly, giving rise to many great jangle guitar bands of the 80s. You know, not like the Smiths, Suede, Lloyd Cole, people like that. But this album is apart from being a really, really good album, it gave us Chrissie Hynde. Now, Chrissie Hynde is an absolute one-off. Not only is she a great singer and a great songwriter, but she is a pure rock and roll woman. There is absolutely no BS with this woman when she's delivering a vocal or when she's on stage. She is the real deal. And she has in turn been a huge influence on scores and scores of great rock and roll and music women since. The band is great. There's a real backbone to these songs from Martin Chambers drums, and the guitar playing by James Honeyman Scott is just lovely. I mean, listen to the guitar solo on Kid, which is one of my very favourite guitar solos. Number 7 from 1969, Crosby, Stills and Nash. This is the sound of Laurel Canyon. This is the sound of introspective songwriters getting together and writing about their feelings, not necessarily something people had done up to this point. And it just happened that these three voices, David Crosby, Graham Nash and Stephen Stills, they just meshed together beautifully. What a sound. Guinevere, Wooden Ships, the absolutely mesmeric Helplessly Hoping, you know, beautifully produced, the vocals really out front and in the centre, but these harmonies sort of defined the sound of the West Coast and Laurel Canyon for many years to come, and influenced Jackson Browne, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac. The influence of this record was undeniable. It was a big commercial success, and Crosby, Stills, Nash, and subsequently Neil Young, when he joined as well, were regarded by many people as the American Beatles. So at number 6, again, going completely turning it on its head, we have from 1977, Never Mind the Bollocks. Now, I know some of you are going to be like, that's not rock, that's not classic rock, that's punk. Well, it kind of is rock if you listen to it. Again, produced by Chris Thomas, who did the Pretenders album. You've got Johnny Rotten snaring out front, and you've got Steve Jones' guitars. He's playing the power chords and the bass. It's all very, very simple. But look, the influence of this record is monumental. There's a simplicity and a toughness to it that made thousands of people think, I can do that, pick up guitars and play 2 strings and power chords and bash out simple songs that cocked a hoop at the establishment and talked about bringing down these bastions of tradition and heritage, like massive companies and record companies, and of course the royalty, the royal family. You know, you've got Pretty Vacant's probably the most famous song, but God Save the Queen, Anarchy in the UK. I mean, so many bands of the last 20-30 years have been influenced by this album. Oasis, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses. But it's also the title of the album and the packaging, which are as influential as anything. You could now snare at the establishment if you felt like it. You could make an album cover from an old newspaper. And you could put a band of non-musicians together. I mean, I think this record sounds great. Chris Thomas knew what he was doing. And I think a lot of the songs are really, really great. But the influence of this album is absolutely unarguable. Inarguable. Unarguable. Doesn't matter. Let's not argue about it. Number 5 from 1967, The Doors' debut album. This was a real coming together of styles. Robbie Krieger's Spanish influence, John Densmore's, the drummer's jazz influence, Ray Manzarek's classical influence, and of course Jim Morrison's blues influence. This was a world away from the breezy singer-songwriter, light pastoral harmonies that we were talking about in Crosby, Stills and Nash. You know, these songs were much, much darker. Break On Through, Light My Fire, Soul Kitchen, The End. This really is the darker side of the rock and roll dream. You know, and it was proof that everything in 1967 wasn't all about the summer of love and about wearing flowers in your hair and colourful jackets and things. So many people, Patti Smith, Susie and the Banshees, Echo and the Bunnymen, the Strokes, influenced by the Doors, and many, many other bands, of course. It sold 1 million copies on its release, so this is another one that really was a big success straight out of the box. But, you know, its influence on disenchanted teenagers sort of sitting in their bedsits, you know, for whom the sort of honeyed harmonies of the West Coast weren't working. This was an album for them. It was a much, much darker album. And I think it was much more in tune with a lot of the teenage angst that people were feeling in the late 60s, going into the 70s. As I've said before, so much of this music reflected things that were happening. Civil rights, Vietnam, Watergate, Nixon, and other things. At number 4, an album with a kind of a similar influence, but an even more influential record, I think, from 1966, The Velvet Underground, with The Velvet Underground and Nico. I mean, this is one of the most pivotal, influential bands in history, and Lou Reed was an absolute visionary. Again, this is so far removed from the Beach Boys in LA. This is a New York record, and the Beach Boys in 1966 were singing about surf and safaris and all those kind of things. And that's great. I love the Beach Boys. But here you've got experimental art rock, and this album spawned garage and punk and goth and indie. All of those musics, for better or for worse, owe a huge debt to Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. The Warhol cover is just as striking as the music. This is the art rock aspect of it, where the image and what you're presenting is just as important and should completely reflect what's happening on the inside of the record. These songs are about sex abuse, drugs, prostitution. I'm Waiting for My Man, Venus in Furs, Femme Fatale, There She Goes. I mean, they're brilliant songs, all of these. I mean, they're so cool, it hurts. And there's space in the production, and the playing is almost disinterested. It has this nonchalant, cool disinterestedness about it. You know what I'm trying to say. In the playing. And that's what's so appealing about it. I mean, again, a huge influence. U2, The Smiths, R.E.M., Talking Heads, Blondie. I could go on and on. Absolutely merits its place on this list. Number 3, though, and we start getting to some of the big hitters. From 1969, I couldn't leave out Led Zeppelin's debut album. Led Zeppelin, of course, rose out of the ashes of the New Yardbirds. And this whole idea of combining sort of epic folk rock with thundering blues. Jeff Beck was kind of doing a little bit of that, maybe in a slightly more jazzy way. But this really was an important turning point in rock music, combining the folk, the blues, the psychedelic workouts. You know, of course, you've got short, sharp songs here like Communication Breakdown, and then you've got the acoustic, epic acoustic drama of Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, and then you've got the psychedelic bluesy swagger of Dazed and Confused. This album put musicianship onto another level, the combination of the players, but also, crucially, it put production into the spotlight, because no record had sounded this crisp, this heavy. There hadn't been so much space, yet been filled with so much clever arranging before. I mean, this was a really great marker of Jimmy Page's musical genius. The balance and the clarity were like nothing we'd heard before. You knew this was a band on the brink of great things, and that Jimmy Page was a major talent, and it was going to be fascinating to see where it went. And of course, it went on to make them the biggest band in the world for many years to come. From 1963, my second greatest debut album of all time is Please Please Me by the Beatles. I had to put the Beatles on here for obvious reasons. Famously recorded in 12 hours under the guidance of the brilliant George Martin. What's so wonderful about this record is just the energy and the exuberance and the joy of it all. There's more energy and fun in one song on this album than there are in a lifetime of Little Mix records. It's the youthfulness of it. I Saw Her Standing There, Twist and Shout, Please Please Me. I mean, these songs are all famous songs. I'm sure you know them, can sing them. 8 of the 14 are originals, so it's a lot more than you might have thought on the very first record. And this album just encouraged people to pick up the guitar, the excitement of the voices together, and the image. You could argue that perhaps it was an album later, and after their Ed Sullivan appearance, that it truly went global and exploded into the phenomenon that still exists today. But I think listening to this record, it's all there. It's all distilled in that 12-hour recording session. The joy of music, the freshness, it's absolutely in this record. And the Beatles as an influence, I don't really need to say anything, do I? You can draw, join the dots yourself with that one. But my number one most influential record of all time and best debut album of all time is from 1967, and it's Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Recorded in London because Jimmy just was getting no traction with the public in America, so he came to London under the guidance of Chas Chandler from The Animals, his manager and producer. Met with Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell on drums, Noel Redding on bass, Mitch Mitchell on drums, and released this album, which was just a huge success straight away. Jimi Hendrix was like a player from another planet. It must have felt like he crash landed in London on the music scene and stepped out of a UFO and started setting fire to guitars and playing them behind his head and behind his back and all these tricks with his colourful image and everything. I mean, what must people have thought? It absolutely defines 1967, but also defines the beginnings of heavy rock, hard rock, bluesy, psychedelic, woozy rock. It changed the landscape for what was possible with the guitar, and because the guitar is the key instrument in rock and classic rock and all the things that we talk about and love, you can't deny this album's place at the top of the list. It influenced millions of players for years to come. Mojo magazine over here in the UK called it the greatest guitar album of all time, and as guitar is the key instrument, that's just another example of just how groundbreaking this whole record must have sounded when it started. Are you a foxy lady? Fire. Are you experienced? On the Purple Haze is on the American version, which is a bit annoying. If you can get hold of the American version, you get Purple Haze as an extra, which of course is a Hendrix classic. But Jimi Hendrix, you know, he was around for only three years. He only made 3 studio records in his lifetime. But we still talk about him in such hushed, revered tones as guitarists that his influence on guitar playing is almost unquantifiable. And this record, I think, is absolutely the best distillation of his talents. He still had yet to be kind of worn down by the endless touring and the industry and the finances and the drugs and everything. And what happens here on this record is absolutely explosive in a way that you won't have heard on any other debut albums. So look, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm absolutely certain you don't agree. There are so many great debut albums, like I said before, but hopefully I have justified my choices here and you've agreed with some of them. If not, please do say in the comments below and let's get some banter going. But until then, please join me again soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.